It happened fast. One moment, the skies were heavy, but still. The next, Cyclone Ditwah made landfall, and everything changed. In just a few violent hours, Sri Lanka was thrust into a state of chaos, as flooding, destruction, and panic spread like wildfire across the country. This wasn't just a storm. This was a catastrophe delivered with brutal speed and unforgiving force. The cyclone slammed into the southwestern coast with winds topping 80 kilometers per hour, tearing through buildings, snapping power lines, and pulling trees from the ground. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Torrential rains followed instantly, pounding roads, rivers, fields, and neighborhoods. Within minutes, streets disappeared. Entire communities were submerged. People had no time to react. There were no delays, no second chances. Just walls of water swallowing homes and highways as terrified residents scrambled for shelter. The infrastructure simply couldn't hold. Storm drains overflowed. Bridges collapsed. Hospitals' facilities meant to offer hope and safety were flooding just like homes. And as water levels rose, so did the sense of panic. The country's emergency services, already stretched, were immediately overwhelmed. Over 180,000 people were displaced almost overnight. Thousands fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs. More than 1,000 emergency shelters opened across the island, filling fast with families who lost everything: homes, livelihoods, even loved ones. Entire districts were cut off, left unreachable by destroyed roads and rising water. Some were stranded on rooftops, waving down helicopters. Others clung to trees, waiting for boats that might never come. Rescue teams, military, Coast Guard, volunteers risked their lives to reach the worst-hit areas. Boats fought currents through urban streets that now looked like rivers. Helicopters flew in supplies where landing wasn't even possible. Trucks were rerouted dozens of times to find a passable road. But in many places, no road existed anymore. And then there were the landslides. Sri Lanka's central highlands had been soaked for days. The soil was already unstable, saturated, primed to give way. When the heavy rains came, hillsides collapsed. Entire villages were wiped out. Homes were crushed under mud and debris. Roads vanished. Access was blocked. Rescue teams could hear people screaming for help, but couldn't reach them. Each slide left a scar on the landscape and a trail of devastation in its wake. Hospitals were hit hard. Some, like the Colombo National Hospital, were partially submerged. Backup generators failed. Medical supplies ran low. Emergency wards overflowed. Power outages made even basic care difficult. And yet, patients kept coming injured in floods, in landslides, in collapsing homes. In some cases, critically ill patients had to be airlifted out because there was no other way to keep them alive. The country's health system was in crisis. And this was just the beginning. Amid the chaos, a new problem emerged: the logistical nightmare of aid delivery. Ports were damaged, roads impassable, shelters overcrowded. The scale of need grew by the hour. International aid began arriving. India, Malaysia, and others sent supplies, personnel, medical support, but getting that aid to the people who needed it most was another battle altogether. Some ports were operating under emergency conditions, with workers unloading life-saving supplies while standing in ankle-deep water. Convoys moved slowly through barely navigable routes. Helicopters were diverted again and again. The bottlenecks were everywhere. Supply chains slowed, communications fractured, and the sheer scale of the damage made it nearly impossible to prioritize. Satellite images showed it all in chilling detail. Before and after shots revealed entire blocks underwater, rivers that had swallowed entire towns, roads that no longer existed. Rainfall data confirmed what everyone on the ground already knew. This wasn't just heavy rain. It was historic, unprecedented, and devastating. Cyclone Ditwah didn't just expose Sri Lanka's vulnerability, it exposed a global pattern. More frequent, more violent storms, more intense rainfall, less time to respond, and worse, less predictability. Weather systems like this, once called rare, are becoming regular. The science is clear. Rising temperatures mean more moisture in the atmosphere, and that means storms like Ditwah hit harder, faster, and with less warning. This isn't just about rebuilding. It's about adapting to a world where these disasters will happen again, and likely sooner than anyone wants to believe. But the recovery won't be fast. It can't be. The damage goes deep physically, economically, emotionally. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next. And you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. The environmental impact alone is staggering. Deforestation and land degradation made the landslides worse. Rivers shifted their paths. Crops were lost. Entire ecosystems disrupted. For farmers, this storm didn't just destroy a season, it may have destroyed a future. And it's not just nature. Infrastructure that should have stood up to the storm didn't. Roads buckled. Power systems failed. Water systems collapsed. Communications lines went down. The country was thrown into a blackout of light, of signal, of stability. There's a hard truth here. As bad as the immediate damage is, the real danger is what comes next. Disease, food insecurity, displacement that turns from temporary to permanent. With hospitals overwhelmed and supplies stretched, even treatable conditions become deadly. The longer the crisis lasts, the harder it gets to manage. Recovery isn't just rebuilding homes, it's restoring systems. And that takes time, money, and coordination that's hard to find in the middle of a disaster zone. The international community has stepped in. But even that comes with challenges. Aid helps, yes, but it can't replace long-term resilience. And right now, Sri Lanka is staring down the hard reality of needing both. This disaster isn't just about this storm. It's about the next one, and the one after that. Adaptation has to be the priority moving forward. That means flood-proof hospitals, stronger, smarter infrastructure, early warning systems that actually reach people in time, environmental management to prevent landslides before they start, reforestation, land stabilization, better urban planning that doesn't trap floodwaters in residential zones, and most importantly, systems that don't collapse the moment the sky does. Because the truth is, the worst effects of Cyclone Ditwah weren't just the wind or the rain. It was what happened after, when people realized how unprepared they were, how fragile the support systems had become, how quickly things unraveled when pushed past the edge. That's the lasting impact. And it demands more than sympathy. It demands change. If you've been following this disaster, if you've seen the footage or read the headlines, now is the time to ask, what comes next? How do we build back stronger? What kind of world are we preparing for? Because storms like Ditwah are no longer once-in-a-decade anomalies. They're part of a new normal. And whether it's Sri Lanka today, or somewhere else tomorrow, the question isn't if it will happen again. It's when. Let us know your thoughts. What do you think needs to change after Cyclone Ditwah? Share your perspective in the comments, pass this along to someone who should see it, and subscribe if you want to stay informed on the real-world impact of climate, infrastructure, and survival. What's most sobering is how predictable this kind of disaster was and how unprepared everything still was when it hit. Cyclone Ditwah didn't sneak up in silence. Weather models tracked it. Warnings were issued. Authorities were aware it was forming and strengthening. But even with all of that, when it made landfall, the storm exposed just how vulnerable the systems in place truly were. Early warnings are only useful if the people hearing them have the ability to act. And for many in Sri Lanka, there was simply no time, no way out, no safety net. Thousands of families lived in areas already marked as high risk. Flood plains, hillside villages, low-lying urban blocks with poor drainage. People who knew the dangers, but had nowhere else to go. And when the storm came, those were the first areas to be overwhelmed. They became death traps. And then came the landslides. It wasn't just that rain fell, it was how much and how fast. The hills gave way with terrifying ease. Entire slopes collapsed. Homes were reduced to rubble in seconds. Villages were wiped from the map. Roads disappeared under mud and stone. Entire rescue routes were swallowed before they could even be used. In some cases, the survivors were the ones who happened to be outside. The people inside their homes sleeping, eating, trying to shelter never had a chance. It's a painful reminder that climate disasters don't only hit with wind and water, they hit with soil, with collapsing earth, with the weight of ecosystems that are already on the edge. And when those systems fail, they don't fail slowly. They fall all at once. The recovery from something like this doesn't begin with rebuilding houses. It begins with finding the bodies, with restoring the basics: clean water, electricity, medicine. It's triage at a national scale, and even that is complicated when the hospitals themselves are underwater. At Colombo National Hospital, staff tried to keep generators running. They moved patients to higher floors. They rationed medication. In other hospitals, staff waded through waist-high water trying to salvage equipment. They performed emergency procedures without electricity. Some had to evacuate critical patients by boat or airlift. And this wasn't one isolated incident. This was happening across the country, all at once. Meanwhile, emergency responders were being pushed to the edge. Rescuers and boats were navigating flooded streets, not knowing if power lines were live. Helicopter crews had to dodge debris in the air. Volunteers brought food and supplies to shelters, often without any idea if they'd be able to get back out again. And even with all that, some regions still hadn't been reached days later. But the disaster wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological. What do you tell a family who's lost everything? What do you say to someone who watched their home slide down a mountain in silence? How do you comfort children living in schools, turned into shelters, surrounded by hundreds of strangers, wondering if their parents are coming back? And then comes the fear, the lingering, relentless fear of what happens next. Because it's not over when the rain stops. When waters begin to recede, another crisis begins. Disease, waterborne illness, contaminated drinking water, overcrowded shelters become breeding grounds for infections. The healthcare system, already broken under pressure, is now facing a new wave of needs: sanitation, vaccinations, emergency treatment for preventable diseases that only become lethal in the aftermath. It's a vicious cycle, and it's one that hits hardest in places that were already vulnerable to begin with. Environmental degradation made this storm worse. Decades of deforestation weakened hillsides. Poor urban planning turned flood zones into residential areas. Rivers that should have carried away excess water were clogged, redirected, overrun. None of this is new. It's been warned about, documented, studied. But warnings don't rebuild houses. Reports don't prevent erosion. Plans don't save lives unless they're funded, implemented, enforced. And the result? Catastrophe. But even now, even in the middle of this disaster, there are lessons. Brutal, painful lessons, but necessary ones. Sri Lanka has no choice but to rethink how it builds, how it grows, how it protects its people. It needs flood-resistant infrastructure, elevated roads, hospitals that can run under pressure, schools that can double as real disaster shelters, not just for walls and a roof. And more than anything, it needs environmental restoration, reforestation, slope stabilization, proper land use management. Because climate change isn't going away. These disasters are going to get worse, not better. The only question is whether the next storm causes the same kind of damage, or whether there's been enough change to withstand it. Cyclone Ditwah isn't just a natural disaster, it's a warning shot. A devastating, high-speed, real-time example of what happens when climate meets fragility. And if the response ends with just aid and rebuilding, that's not enough. There has to be a shift, of full, systemic transformation in how countries prepare for this kind of threat. Because Ditwah is not the last. It's part of a series, a chain reaction being set off by a warming planet, changing weather systems, rising seas, and overstretched infrastructure. This is where long-term resilience comes in. Not just patching roads, but redesigning them. Not just restocking hospitals, but re-engineering them. Not just cleaning up rivers, but restoring ecosystems. Not just issuing alerts but building systems that let people act on them. It's a tall order, but it's not optional. It starts with listening to the science, backing it with funding, building early warning systems that actually work, planning for landslides, for floods, for displacement not when the clouds gather, but when the skies are clear. Cyclone Ditwah revealed more than broken buildings. It revealed broken systems. And fixing those systems is the only way forward. If you're following this story, you know it's more than headlines. It's people. It's homes. It's everything from lost crops to lost family members. This wasn't just a bad storm, it was a national trauma. And the world should care. Because every flood, every collapse, every overcrowded shelter is another reminder of how unprepared we are for the climate age. The age we're already in. The harshest part. Most of this didn't have to end this way. And that failure cost lives. Because when the riverbanks burst and the landslides came down, the damage wasn't just from nature, it was from decisions made years ago, or decisions not made. Flood zones that were developed anyway, warnings that weren't heeded, systems that were underfunded, infrastructure that was never upgraded. The gap between what could have been done and what was done, that's where the tragedy sits. You can feel it in the shelters, packed to the brim, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people crammed into school buildings, churches, sports centers, any space that was high and dry enough. The air thick, the electricity unreliable, the sense of loss hanging in every corner. And the question on everyone's face is the same. How long do we have to stay here? There are no good answers. Because going back isn't always possible. Homes were washed away, foundations destroyed. Some towns don't even exist anymore in the way they did before. Roads to them are gone. Fields turned to lakes. It's not just about surviving the storm, it's about surviving after it, with no map, no clear timeline, and no clear plan. And the trauma that doesn't go away with food packages and bottled water. For kids, this is now part of their memory. For elders, this may be the second or third time they've lived through destruction like this. And the hardest conversations are happening quietly, far from cameras. Families deciding whether they can even afford to rebuild, or if it's time to leave everything behind and start over somewhere else. But where do you go when the storms are everywhere? This is the reality of a changing climate. Borders won't protect anyone. No one is immune. And what happened in Sri Lanka is what's coming to many other parts of the world, especially places where infrastructure hasn't caught up to the intensity of the new normal. And still, despite everything, the country is fighting back. You see it in the rescue teams who haven't slept in days. In the volunteers forming lines to pass buckets, blankets, and rice. In the doctors working by flashlight. In the neighbors turning their motorcycles into ambulances. It's not clean. It's not perfect. But it's human. It's resilience showing up in real time. But resilience without resources only goes so far. And that's where governments and the international community come in. This storm must not just be marked by its destruction. It has to be the catalyst for change. Because if the world responds to Ditwah by treating it as just another tragic weather event, the cycle continues. Let us know what you think. Have your communities faced anything like this? What needs to change, locally and globally, to break the cycle? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who still thinks natural disaster means nothing could be done. And subscribe for more grounded, real-world breakdowns that cut through the noise and tell it like it is.